Well, good morning, everybody. At least those of you who are joining us live. We know it's in the morning. This is our ShawLocal.com Bears Insider podcast. I am Hub Arkush, along with my co-hosts every week, Kyle Nabors, who is our group sports editor at Shaw Media, and Sean Hammond, our Chicago Bears beat reporter at ShawLocal.com Bears Insider. Great to be with you all again this week. Just take care of some business real quick. If you're listening as a podcast, that's great. That's what we intend to do here. But we know a number of you are with us live on StreamYard. You can join these podcasts normally every Friday morning at 9:30 Chicago time. Unfortunately, there was a company meeting this morning that pushed us back a little bit, but we'll be back to our normal time, 9:30 Chicago time. You go to one of our Twitter accounts. Mine is at Hub_Arkush. Sean is at Sean_Hammond. Kyle didn't get the underscore. It's at Kyle Nabors. And when you go to our Twitter accounts at 9:30 Chicago time, or anytime within that hour between 9:30 and 10:30, you'll be directed to join the podcast live. You can also get there via YouTube. If you prefer to just get us a podcast, then keep doing what you're doing. If you want a regular subscription, you go to the App Store on your phone or iTunes or ShawLocal.com. You'll get instructions how to download it so that we come to you automatically every week. And we do enjoy covering the entire National Football League for you. Sometimes you can get into a little, whatever's going on in the world. But for the most part, because we are based in the Midwest and primarily in Chicago, it's Bears, it's NFC North, and obviously plenty of Bears talk right now, guys, as both the general manager and the head coach jobs remain open. My New Year's resolution is to spend a lot more time taking questions from those who are with us. Now, I'm terrible at New Year's resolutions, so keep me on it this time, guys. And I know we've got a great question to start. We're going to get to them in just a moment. But real quick, I think we should start with just impressions now that there's a week under our belts. Nobody's been hired anywhere. That's a little bit surprising. I thought the first head coach would have at least fallen. It's going to happen any minute. When it does, there will be a run. Not as surprised that the GMs are moving slower, but we do have news now that one of the Bears candidates, Joe Schoen, appears to be getting the Giants job. We knew he was one of two finalists, and there's reports all over now as we record that the Giants and Schoen are working out a deal. A little disappointing because the Giants are so good hiring general managers. When you look at their history with George Young and Ernie Accorsi and Jerry Reese, Dave Gettleman didn't work out as well. That it tells me right off the bat, Schoen is probably a real quality candidate. Wasn't my first choice for the Bears, but now the pressure ramps up a little bit with the Bears and the Vikings and the Raiders still in the marketplace. So, Sean, I'll come to you first. Where do you think we're at after almost 2 full business weeks of this process?
Yeah, well, George McCaskey said that this was going to be an exhaustive process, and it appears to be so. I mean, they've interviewed a lot of candidates for GM and for head coach. I think they had 10 through yesterday, Thursday, the 20th. They had interviewed 10 GM candidates, and now it looks like Schoen is apparently off the board. And there was a report out there that Ed Dodds had withdrawn. Which leaves us with 8 guys who have interviewed that appear to still be in the process. And I agree with you, Hub. I had shown, we were just, this week, the 3 of us were putting together our list of top 3 GM and head coach candidates. I think Schoen was in my top 3. I forget exactly where I had him, but certainly he seems like the type of guy who would be able to fill this role. He's been a number 2 for several years now in Buffalo and has been around the league in the front office for a long time.
Kyle, any thoughts you have as far as what you've seen so far? Yeah, and again, we know so little. I mean, we know the list of candidates. Nobody's in the room. Nothing's really leaking out of the room. So just based again on the way the Bears are handling it, and really the fact that they appear to be in step with everybody else. As I said, nobody hired yet, and so certainly nothing at least to be concerned about.
I see Jesus. I'm going to go with Godines, just popped in the chat. Said it probably means that the Bills OC will be the Giants' next head coach, which actually was my immediate thought when I saw Joe Schoen was going to New York to be with the Giants, because we had talked pretty extensively that I think all 3 of us on various levels like Brian Daboll quite a bit, the Bills offensive coordinator. I do think that's not an incredible leap in logic there to think that would at least influence Brian Daboll's decision a bit with Joe Schoen going to New York.
Well, Jesus and Kyle both. I mean, I don't disagree, but it is. Kyle just used the word leap, and it is a little bit of a leap. Certainly it would appear to give Schoen a leg up if Brian Daboll is his guy. We don't know anything about the relationship between Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll. We do know that Brian Daboll is in great demand. It's not just the Giants or the Bears. He's going to be requested, if not already, by almost every team in the process. And if Brian Daboll is ready, guys, he's going to take a look at the situation. He's going to take a look at the roster he's inheriting. He's going to start with the quarterback he's inheriting. And I think it's safe to say that Brian Daboll would probably rather have Justin Fields than Daniel Jones, because pretty much everybody else in the NFL would. Now, Jesus, I'm not discounting your point. You're absolutely right. There is a very good chance that there's a strong relationship there, and that could, make the Giants a front runner for Daboll if that's what they want. But, Kyle, I like you said, it's a little bit of a leap. It certainly is something to be concerned about if you're a Brian Daboll fan.
Yeah, absolutely. Overall in this process, guys, I can't decide if I'm being impatient or if this feels like it's taking longer than usual. And I don't mean about the Bears specifically. I mean about the NFL's coaching or hiring cycle in general.
Well, Sean, I'll tell you what I think. It is taking a little bit longer because all the hubbub about those 2 weeks at the end of the season, we kept saying it was meaningless. They were limited 2-hour Zoom conferences with guys who were still working at other jobs. It was a chance to start doing some due diligence and check a few boxes. Now you've got the same situation you run into every year where the guys who are in the most demand are still working in the playoffs, and it's not where their focus is. I am stunned that we're recording on Friday. The Bears were interviewing Todd Bowles on Saturday before his Sunday playoff game, because that's the only way they can do this, and I think a lot of teams are being careful not to leap too quickly. They really do not. All these teams that are in the hiring cycle have been in the hiring cycle within 3-4 years. They're doing it again because they got it wrong. There were no long time, head coaching successes that got the axe here other than really Mike Zimmer in Minnesota. So I think teams are being more careful, and I think a lot of it has to do with some of the young guns, some of these guys that have gotten hired, the leaps that were made on guys like Matt LaFleur and Zach Taylor, who are still working. 2 of the last 8 coaches, and everybody's lists includes all the usual suspects, but there's just more work to do now that we've seen some of these young coaches have such immediate success.
Sean, can I jump in just for a second?
Yeah,
sorry. You say that, and I wonder if part of the reason it's taking longer is overall, I think we're starting to see organizations that are more willing to cut the cord after that second year. I mean, we even saw someone get fired after their first year here, right? And I wonder if teams are saying, well, if we're willing to cut guys loose at a quicker rate, that means we should at least spend a bit more time at the beginning of the process to give ourselves a longer runway here to find out who we think has the highest upside.
Yeah, I mean, Sean, when you look at the teams that are hiring, I think Kyle and I are saying the same things. These are all teams that just screwed up fairly badly, and some came to it quicker than others. But Matt Nagy got 4 years, Brian Flores got 3 years. When you look at a team like the Pittsburgh Steelers that is competitive every year, and you realize they've had 3 coaches in over 50 years, that's what you aspire to. When you look at the guys,
and their fan base wants a 4th coach, by the way. I don't know if you
yeah, at the moment, but they'll get over it. Listen, I think the fact that Tomlin got that team to the playoffs is a miracle in and of itself. So, some fans have what they want. But Sean, I know you're a little newer to at least covering this process, and Kyle's right. It does feel like it's taken longer than it should, but it doesn't feel to me like it's taking too long. I start to worry when you're 1 of 8 and 3 or 4 of those jobs are filled. Then I start to worry. When you're 1 of 4, once that first job fills, and it looks like it's filling right now in New York, then the Bears need to move on the GM. And I've been as adamant as I can be. If they hire the coach before the GM, this is going to be a failure again. And I'm not giving any caveats. I firmly believe that. And so, I think that they're within the realm, or not the realm, but they're within a reasonable window now. But now they got to be careful if, in fact, Schoen is the Giants' new GM.
Yeah, I was going to say something to that same effect, Hub. Don't discount how quickly things could develop here once that first domino falls, because, it's kind of been that situation where everyone's in this feeling out process, and the scheduling as far as just, there's a lot of head coach jobs open right now. These guys are trying to schedule these Zoom calls with multiple teams, and a lot of these guys are still working in the playoffs and working through all the logistics of just getting into this process. And once that first domino falls, once that first GM is hired, which it looks like we're about to have that process begin here. Once that first head coach is hired, some of these other teams are going to start making a move, because you don't want to be the team that's sitting there watching everybody else make a hire. And not that should matter, but generally, you're going to be losing your top candidates.
All right, guys, let's find out what all our friends here on the podcast have on their minds. I know, Kyle, you said, I don't know if it was Jesus's, but you said you had one great question that you wanted to get to first.
Well, we have a bunch of questions, and actually now that we have some more in here, I do want to make sure I get to that one that was asked even before we started. But since we're talking about Bradley has a two-parter here. The first part is more of a comment, and he agrees with you, Hub. And the second one is definitely a question that I think we should get to.
If they hire, and Brad, thanks for checking in, Bradley Bosworth, if they hire a head coach before a GM, that is dumb. If the head coach is Jim Caldwell, George would be lighting this fan base on fire. I'm not sure if that's a question or a comment.
Well, I think it's a comment, but I think all three of us would disagree with the comment, right?
Go ahead, Kyle.
I think there are higher upside candidates than Jim Caldwell. Like, if you want to take a swing at like Brian Daboll, I think he has a higher upside than Jim Caldwell. He also has a much lower floor. You don't know what you're getting. If you hire Jim Caldwell, you're getting a respectable name. It's a team that's going to be competitive. It's going to be a locker room that respects their coach and likes their coach. I don't think Jim Caldwell would be a bad hire by any stretch.
No, and Jim Caldwell originally was very high on my list, but as we've worked through this, guys, and by the way, he's my age, so you have to take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt. He's 67 years old, and so I can tell you he is absolutely competent and capable. My concern, though, is where this team is at, is that if he is the right guy, he's still going to be 69 or 70 before they have a chance to get to a Super Bowl. And even if that happens, how much longer is he going to want to work after that? You're not looking, we just talked about this, you're not looking for a guy for another 2, 3, 4 years. And so I forgive me if it's age discrimination. I guess I'd be discriminating against myself, but I'm in a different business. That probably concerns me the most about Jim Caldwell is just his age, and one of his great traits is his ability to communicate with his players. So I'm not terribly worried about him communicating with 20-somethings. But you do wonder, is he going to be as good at it as somebody who's still in their 50s, 40s, or 30s? And again, to me, it's a short-term hire. That's the only thing that really bothers me about it. But Brad, I don't think it would necessarily be a mistake or be the wrong move at all. Sean, I don't know how you feel about it.
Well, yeah, you're right about the age, and too, I believe he quit in Miami because of a health issue, and so that raises some concerns. I don't know if that was 2020 or 2019.
It was July of 2019, Sean, but according to my sources, it was as much a Brian Flores issue as it was a health issue.
Yeah, so you don't know
sure which way that goes. Yeah,
it seems like there's been a lot of Brian Flores issues lately, but yeah, so I am with you guys. I don't think Jim Caldwell would be a bad hire at all. I mean, you kind of connect the dots here too. I feel like there's a possibility that could be one way that the Bears are leaning if they want somebody who has experience and they want somebody who brings that respect into the locker room. I don't know if respect is the right word, that leadership ability and somebody who the players are going to respect. He's certainly a guy who would fit that description. And, with the history with Bill Polian, I could totally see that being a direction that this search goes.
You know what the problem would be there, Kyle, is that I'm sure a fair segment of the Bears fan base would say, oh, well, that's Polian's guy. That's why they hired him. But my response to that is, isn't that why Bill Polian's in the room? So that I don't have an issue with. We're talking about a guy who had 3 winning seasons with the Detroit Lions. Forget that he took the Colts to a Super Bowl. I mean, nobody wins with the Detroit. Rod Marinelli followed him and went 0-16. So I mean, yeah, I don't know why there would be objections to Jim Caldwell. I guess I just don't know, Kyle, why he'd be the best choice.
I think he absolutely brings. At a minimum, I think that makes you competent. Which maybe that is a low bar, but when you've struggled to be competent for an extended period of time, I think that's a good place to start. My question, and I think a lot of people, when they have concerns about Jim Caldwell, is, like I said, the upside. And I think the better way to put it is, and you talk about age, Hub, is, the game of football is evolving really quickly in terms of the way analytics are being used, not just when it comes to drawing up plays, but the way decisions are made on a football field. And I do wonder, and without knowing, how Jim Caldwell feels about the changing of the way football, the way analytics are changing football decisions. I think that would be one valid concern you could have.
I think that's very justified, and then I look on the other side of it. If you want a real plus of all these guys, who knows more, who's in a better position, who's the most likely to put together the best staff? Because, not only is Jim Caldwell going to be wired into how to put together a staff and know the people that he wants, now maybe the age isn't such a liability, because you get a top OC or DC who says, hey, I come in here, maybe even particularly a defensive coordinator, and I can have a top 5 defense right away, and there may be a transition here in 2, 3, 4 years. So, there's that potential plus on the other side.
Hub, I could give you a hug right now for the absolute perfect segue you did back to that first question that I said I wanted to get to. I'm going to throw it up on the screen for you now, because you are the perfect person to answer this.
Well, I can always use a hug. Let's see here. So this is from Remy. For head coach, are you aware of situations where if 2 candidates are a coin flip, if candidate A has a better potential slate of assistants, that those assistants have tipped the balance? Absolutely. It's a major factor in these interviews. It's everybody thinks it's as simple as, the guy comes in like a job interview most of us would go on, and everybody has the same qualifications, and you're trying to stand out as an individual or as a person. No, it's not that at all. In these interviews, you're talking about different candidates with different credentials and different pluses and minuses, and you've got to decide, what are the most important. And certainly putting together an outstanding staff is critical, and that's why people think it's just the old boys network, but you've got Todd Bowles, Dan Quinn. They've done this before and they've done it well. It's not necessarily why they failed. Of course, Jim Caldwell in that category too. And then on the flip side, again, I've talked about this with Brian Flores. He went through 4 offensive coordinators in 3 years. I mean, that's got to be a concern if he's a guy that you're looking at. So, yeah, I think it's a major factor. It's a great question. And not to say that some of the younger guys can't do it. I mean, I look at a Brian Daboll, and no, he's never been a head coach, but he's been with 6 organizations, and he's crossed paths with a lot of great coaches. And there's a lot of guys who would love to come and work with him. Same thing with Matt Eberfluss. I don't know if Nathaniel Hackett's a kind of a strange intermediate candidate to me. I love the fact that he's doing what he's doing in Green Bay, and that he's working with a head coach who's almost 15 years younger than him, and Aaron Rodgers. But when I look at his career path, he's a guy who strikes me as maybe he's getting more credit for the situation he's in and the team he's with. You always worry. Byron Leftwich. Well, how much of it is Brady and how much of it is Arians? Different guys. Eric Bieniemy. How much of it is Andy Reid? In this case, I'm not saying Hackett's a bad choice. I just wonder that if it isn't more LaFleur and Rodgers than it is Hackett. I saw you shaking your head, Kyle.
Yeah, quickly, Remy, that was a really good question. And Hub, I like your response, because I actually had not thought of it in that context, because I always think of, okay, guy goes in, talks about, oh, this is the type of scheme I want to run. This is what I want to do. This is how I think I can utilize the players on this roster currently. But I never thought of the fact really of that guys probably do come in with I'm going to use like a binder of, okay, these are the type of guys I want to go out and try and, put together my staff with. That's a really good selling point, I'm sure, for guys.
Which brings up an interesting point with a guy like Kellen Moore, who hasn't interviewed for the Bears job, but he's coached in one place and he's been there for 4 years. You look at a guy like Daboll, like Hub said, he's coached various places over several years with some really good winning staffs, and certainly he has quite an array of connections across the league.
And then sorry, to go back to the Nathaniel Hackett. I actually agree with you there. Yeah, I mean, this Green Bay defense, even a year ago, I was not very impressed with. They've made a lot of strides, but I don't know if that's really a scheme thing. As I thought they did a really good job in the offseason adding pieces to that defense that really complemented what they already had in place. And I wonder how much of it is Hackett improving the roster, or Hackett improving. Yeah.
You're actually talking about Joe Barry, though. Hackett's the offensive coordinator.
Oh, my bad.
But again, same story is Aaron Rodgers is ready to refuse to come back to the Packers because the GM doesn't know what he's doing. I'm not sure Brian Gutekunst isn't the executive of the year right now. When you look at, Devondre Campbell, who was a bargain free agent, is now an all-pro linebacker. How's that for a decent signing? Rashawn Gary, who looked like a bust for the first couple of years, has now surpassed the Smith brothers as their main outside rush linebacker. You find the kid who's playing safety for him now, I'm drawing a blank on his name. They picked him up midseason. He's got two pick sixes.
Rasul Douglas?
Rasul Douglas. Yeah, what a job they did putting that all together. And I think that's the reason that Joe Barry's name isn't out there more, because normally you'd look at what he's done with that defense and Hackett on offense. Listen, to do what they've done without Bakhtiari most of the year, and then to lose Elton Jenkins, who was the only way they got by without Bakhtiari, they've done a great job there. But I just, I think LaFleur is going to be the coach of the year. I think Aaron Rodgers is going to be the MVP, regardless of whether I agree with it or not. And by the way, obviously, for what he's done on the field, deserving of the award as we relate that to these coaches. That's where it gets a little tricky. But Kyle, I can tell you, not only do they come with a list of candidates, many of them come in with a handshake deal. That's how Bruce Arians got the Bucs job. Matt Nagy wanted Todd Bowles here. Vic Fangio left. Matt Nagy and Todd Bowles had a strong connection, and Todd Bowles pretty much said, wanted to come to Chicago, but I had promised Bruce if he got another job, I'd go with him. And that's how that whole thing came down.
Let's go over here to a question from Timothy Wire here, Hub.
Tim wants to know, excuse me, my voice is breaking. Tim wants to know our thoughts about the GM also being in charge of the football operations, having experience in wearing two hats like Rick Smith. Could that person hire an assistant GM? Well, this is what's going on in the interview room, guys. And I think Sean mentioned at the top, Ed Dodds had removed his name from consideration. It bothers me and it doesn't bother me. Ed Dodds has now removed his name from consideration from 4 jobs that he's interviewed for, been requested to interview for in the last 2 years. A lot of guys do that just once they get wind of the fact that they're not going to get it. And so they don't want to have it look like they didn't get it. So they leave sooner. Other guys do it because they go into the room and they become convinced it's a situation that they're set up to fail. And people may forget that Ed Dodds' boss at Indianapolis, Chris Ballard, who's now won his first Executive of the Year award as the GM of the Colts, was rumored to be one of the finalists with Ryan Pace 7 years ago, and he withdrew his name from consideration. Now, I happen to know that wasn't because he was afraid of not getting the job. He was afraid of getting the job. He came out of the interview room having told the Bears the way he saw it working, and he knew it wasn't going to happen. And so he decided not to go for the job. There is a real concern there. And now you look at these guys with these varied backgrounds interviewing with the Bears. I mean, some are strictly evaluators, some are strictly business guys, some have a little bit of both. And I think the trend now should be towards that director of football operations. And then if you have a guy who has evaluating skills as well, which is why Rick Smith is so interesting, because he was strictly an evaluator and a talent guy. But then towards the end of his stay in Houston, he did get an operations title as well. It's why he seems to be the perfect candidate. Now you flip it around, you look at an Omar Khan, who for 20 years with the Steelers was in operations, in the last, I think, 11 years as director of football operations. He was working below a really strong GM in Kevin Colbert, who is an evaluator. And that's why he needed Omar Khan. But this is a guy who has seen some of the best evaluators in the business, and the way that the CBA and the salary cap and the COVID protocols and the roster changes, all of this has changed, guys. I prefer the idea of somebody with a varied resume like an Omar Khan to an outstanding evaluator Let's say a Morocco Brown, a guy who I think he's supposed to interview on Monday, assuming the job is still open then, and has a Bears history, is an outstanding evaluator, an outstanding human being. But I don't know. I talked to Greg Gabriel, my buddy, who, of course, 30-plus year scout, worked with us at Shaw for a while on our draft stuff and spent 10 years as the Bears director of college scouting. He feels that Morocco Brown is a guy who has enough varied experience that he could definitely handle the GM role and would be a really good hire. I really like the guy, but I just don't know, about being able to handle everything involved in running an NFL franchise, particularly with what we've seen these last couple of years from COVID.
Yeah, there's very few guys who can do it all. And, it's evaluating talent and understanding the salary cap and all the things that go with that are two very different things. So it takes a person who's been around the block to be able to do both those things. And I think that's why you have to be able to bring in other people who have specific skill sets. If you hire a guy who's come up as a talent evaluator, make sure he's hiring someone who can handle the other aspects of the job that come with it. Because no matter what the title is, if it's president of football operations or GM or whatever, there's, at the end of the day, somebody's got to make those final decisions. And it comes down to what type of people, what type of voices are in the room there with him too.
Kyle, have we, and always want to encourage people to go to shawlocal.com, because what we give you in the podcast is 5-10%. It's not even that much of what we can give you a week long with our coverage. Have we posted our top 3 choices yet?
We have not, which we're probably going to want to go back here and update them, since we've had, I know Michael had listed Ed Dodd as one of his top 3. And then I think you both had shown in your top 3, right?
I did.
I had Omar Khan and Rick Smith, and I think I had Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah. So I could be wrong. I thought that's not top 3. Yeah, if I didn't, we have to update
that it is on my to-do list to get that up this afternoon.
The reason I mentioned it is I want to just talk for a minute about Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, because he's a guy in the group who has the least impressive resume, and in some respects, to me, is the most impressive candidate. What do you want for your GM? Well, how would you feel about Theo Epstein, who was a baseball executive, an evaluator, but also an innovator in the advanced metrics, and really had a complete grasp of the job, including the business side of the job? Or how about Arthur Konashovitz? How's everybody liking him here in Chicago now? An evaluator who has absolutely hired Billy Donovan, and we're not trying to get into a different sport here, but, people are asking, well, God, what's gotten into Kobe White? Well, he has a real NBA coach is what's gotten into Kobe White, and so, these are 2 examples right here in town of where you didn't go for the pure evaluator. You went for the sport executive, and how has that worked out for you? So that's why I've kind of moved away from some of these pure, personnel directors. Not to say they can do it. I'm not, saying if they hire one that I'm going to be negative about it. But that's how I built my top 3, which I think is an answer to the original question.
Let's go here to I don't have the answer to this. Maybe you guys do. Is Rick Smith interviewing anywhere?
I don't know the answer to that either. I thought I saw that he had interviewed. I thought I saw that maybe George Payton in Denver. I could be wrong. I don't want to give bad information. I thought I had saw that he had an interview maybe too, but I'm not sure, or at least had him requested, but I'm not sure. Sean, I don't know if you know more about that.
No, I don't. And
there was a lot of smoke early with around his name, and then it's kind of died down. Which
Brian, he is quite the mystery man. There's no question about that. We
can say that he has not interviewed for the Bears at this point.
Right, but we did see a report that they had requested an interview, and he's not under contract with anybody else. So, Rick Smith was arguably the best drafter in the NFL at the end of the aughts and the early to middle teens. I mean, he had an 8 to 10 year run in the first round that is probably going to go down in history. When you add a J.J. Watt, a DeAndre Hopkins, and a Dwayne Brown, and a Deshaun Watson, and a Whitney Merciless, and they just kept coming one after another, and did well in other rounds, not as well late. There were some questions from some people I've talked to about some of his hirings in his department. Sadly, however, as he was in the midst of this incredible run of great draft picks in the first round, his wife became quite ill. He had to take a leave of absence. And eventually, when the time came to come back, the organization had moved on. And I think it was a mutual parting of the ways. And so he's been out of the league for gosh, 3-4 years now. And so that's always going to be a little tougher putt. I know his name comes up around all these jobs, and I think that there was at least one, maybe two other interview requests, but I can't say that for sure.
All right. Hub, you kind of hit on this, but just to see if we can put a succinct bow on it from CJ Williams, here's a good question for you.
CJ wants to know, along with Tim's question, what is the primary difference between a president of football ops and GM? Trying to understand why the McCaskies prefer to have just a GM over a president of football ops. CJ, I've been trying to talk about this for weeks. Nobody wants to hear me. It's semantics. There doesn't have to be any difference. I mean, I mentioned Kevin Colbert, in Pittsburgh, who is one of the most successful in the business right now. He's been the general manager forever. And Omar Khan, the president of football operations, or vice president, that's why they're usually vice presidents, worked for Kevin Colbert. You look at maybe the best of our time, Ozzie Newsome in Baltimore was the GM, and he had administration and operations guys working for him. It's just a title, Now, generally, when you look at these guys who are, VP of administration or VP of operation, they don't have the scouting or the evaluator background that the general managers have. And so it really becomes a question of, do you prefer a guy who understands or grasps the entire business and is best suited to hire the best personnel director? This is what I've been saying all along. A lot of teams have had general managers and personnel directors. Look at Mickey Loomis down in New Orleans. I mean, who's been better than the Saints in recent years? Sean Payton's a part of it. Mickey Loomis is not an evaluator. Mickey Loomis is a business guy who the old man hired before he passed away to oversee all of his enterprises. I think he was the GM of the Pelicans too when Tom Benson, I guess they still own both teams. And he hires great evaluators. That's where Ryan Pace came. Ryan Pace was his personnel director as the general manager. And Jeff Ireland, who has big Bears connections, who's interviewed with the Bears, is currently the personnel director there, who's now, so it's just semantics is all it is. But it does get back to that initial question of, do you want somebody who's strictly a talent guy, or do you want the top guy to be strictly a talent guy, or a guy who grasps the entire business? And I think there are more than enough great evaluators out there, Sean, that I'd rather have the guy who grasps the entire business.
Yeah, I would too. I want to be able to see that big picture and be, as long as you listen to your top evaluators, you surround yourself with the right people and you hire the right personnel directors and whatnot, that's the type of person who is going to have a wide-ranging effect on your organization as opposed to just a pure talent evaluator.
Yeah, Kyle, I don't have the time for it, but if any of our listeners want to just go study the 32 NFL mastheads, I'll guarantee you'll find at least half a dozen or more teams that at the top have a general manager and a personnel director, which is another way to go. And it's what I'm hoping the Bears will do here, but we have to wait and see. George did say there was going to be other organizational changes, and that's up to the guy that they hire to be the general manager.
All right, Hub, here we go.
Thomas Klein has been with us for a while. Hub, will you be as sick as me if Harbaugh leaves Michigan for the Raiders? Go blue. Tom, I will be, but not for the reason you think. Jim is a friend of mine. We go way back, and I pity anybody who goes to work for the Raiders. It's just, it is more dysfunctional than the Bears. I can assure you of that. And now, a strong-willed guy like Jim, who might want total control and be able to hire the GM, and that's not unheard of either. There are certain guys who can do that. Bill Belichick, if he didn't have both jobs, could do it. Sean Payton certainly could do it if he went elsewhere. Andy Reid pretty much did it in Kansas City. Harbaugh has those kind of chops, but it's just ownership doesn't have a clue. And more than that, and guys, this is not because people are going to take offense to this, but I think it's realistic. You have to look at the market. It's a big factor with a lot of these guys, and sometimes it's just the size of the market, and sometimes it's the TV market or the extra opportunities, the TV shows and the endorsement deals you're going to get. It's all part of it. These guys are in it to make a living, and Vegas has a lot of that to offer. But my concern with being in Las Vegas is the distractions there for managing a 50 to 60 member group of young men, 20 somethings, and look at what's happened already. Now, maybe Henry Ruggs was just a ne'er-do-well. I don't know. But he's your first-round draft pick in jail awaiting almost a certain life sentence. Last year's for the same draft, it was the same draft. Arnett, the cornerback, is gone. Another first-round draft pick. Other guys who've already gotten sideways or in trouble in Vegas. I'm not saying Las Vegas is a bad place. I know people love it.
Is it Las Vegas or just the dysfunction of the Raiders? I mean, they've always been kind of more willing to take a shot on a guy that might be outside the lines a little bit more.
I think it's both, Kyle, and I think that's a fair point. And again, I don't have anything against Las Vegas, but do you want a market that is open 24/7, with nothing but opportunities for trouble? Or do you want a more traditional urban setting, where the guys who are going to look for trouble are going to find it, but it's not out there screaming at everybody? I just think it's a factor. Okay, I'm not saying it should be a disqualifier, but it certainly would be a concern of mine if I was looking at it. Is how much harder does it make the job?
Overall, going back to Harbaugh, I don't think he's going anywhere. To me, we're far enough along in the hiring cycle where if he was going somewhere, you would think he'd at least be interviewing by this point, right? I saw JJ McCarthy, a good old guy or kid from LaGrange, Illinois, who's now a quarterback at Michigan, retweet Jim Harbaugh was down on a recruiting trip and doing
Yeah,
he was doing some weightlifting in his dress shirt and pants on a recruiting trip yesterday. And it just, I know he's a college coach. You can't just say, I'm not going to do recruiting stuff while I think about leaving for the NFL. But I just don't get a sense that he's all that inclined to take an NFL job right now.
Guys, I'm in a tough spot here. I mentioned Jim as a friend. We've had some communication over the last couple of weeks, and the best I can say is I'm not sure that he's sure of what he wants to do. I think he's in a situation where he had a wildly successful year. The world is at his fingertips. He does truly love Ann Arbor. He would truly love to win a Super Bowl ring. And I think he's in kind of a unique situation here where he's really struggling to make up his mind. That's the best that I can read it right now. And
I think a lot of people, I mean, not just being a coach in their careers, we've all had to make that choice at some point in our life. Like you're in a good job, you feel comfortable, you like where you're at, you like where your family is at, but there's always that pull, right, to tackle something new, something bigger, a new challenge. And that's kind of where I get the sense he's at. And that's not surprising to hear you say this.
He is an extremely devoted family guy. He and his wife, Sarah, have, I think, 3 young children now, plus 3 older children from his first marriage. I don't know about all 3 of the older children, but obviously his son Jay's on his coaching staff and all the youngsters are there. I know that he bought a house for his parents whose backyard abuts his backyard in Ann Arbor. I mean, there's a lot of roots there. I mean, he grew up there, obviously, and before they moved to California when he was in high school. But he is the most competitive human being I've ever met in my life. And that's why my sense is that he wants both. And I think he got a taste of it. And I think he wants to win a national championship with Michigan. He's 55 years old. And if he could do that in the next couple of years, then I suspect he'd be back in the NFL in a hurry. I kind of said that in the beginning before they got as hot as they did, before they beat Ohio State and before they won the Big Ten championship. And people were asking questions. And as disappointing as that loss to Georgia was, it now doesn't look quite as bad. And you kind of wish they'd have gotten a crack at Alabama. Who knows? So
I think JJ McCarthy is going to give him a chance to win a national title here in the next couple of years.
Kyle, I think a lot of folks who might not be from our area might not know, but if you watched that Orange Bowl, I mean, he is definitely the best quarterback on that team. It's just, I always screw up the names because they're both Irish names, McCarthy and the starter, McNamara.
McNamara, yeah.
I'm sorry, guys. There's no bias there. It's just McCarthy and McNamara. I keep going back and forth. McNamara is a great kid. He is coming back because he probably doesn't have a great NFL future, and so that's going to create the tension that they had between Tom Brady and Drew Henson. But there's no question McCarthy is ready now, and now you've only got 2 more years of control of him before he's going to be going to the NFL. So. I think that probably is a big part of it. I think the question he's asking himself with Michigan, and I didn't mean to get off on a long Michigan tangent, but I am an alum, and Kevin's right. It matters to me. Is can they rebuild that defense? I mean, they've got some nice pieces because most of the offense is coming back, other than the center and Haskins, of course. But they're loaded at running back. So I just don't think in fairness to Jim. He has not, to my knowledge, said a word that he hasn't put himself into this conversation about any of these jobs, and I think that's what's frustrating some people, but I think that's what he's being so careful about.
All right, well, let's switch over here to another question from Mike Johnson on a topic that I wanted to get into a little bit here, Hub.
Mike wants to know any news on Vic Fangio. Is he interviewing for any of the open head coaching spots? I believe he's going to get paid for 1 more year in Denver. I'm pretty sure he got a 4-year deal, not a 3-year deal. And one of my very best sources has told me that Vic is at a point where he's not in a hurry and he may not be anxious to jump back in. He has not been requested to interview for any head coaching jobs, nor is he going to get one this time around. I mean, he's coming fresh up. This idea of hiring these guys who just got fired, unless it's an exceptional situation like an Andy Reid, who you knew what you were getting, or even what the Bears did with John Fox. While I hated it at the time, you couldn't argue about the fact. I mean, John Fox, take a look, guys. In his last 3 years at Denver, he was 12-4, 13-3, and 12-4. That's the coach the Bears hired. I thought it was a mistake for different reasons, but that's the only way this happens. A guy with a Flores or a Fangio record, they don't get hired again, in the next cycle. I mean, I guess Adam Gase, but look how that worked out, So Vic's not going to get a head coach. He's probably not ever going to, I mean, just based on his age and the time it will take him to rebuild his resume again. But he's best defensive coordinator in football. And I guarantee you, once these jobs start to fill, his phone's going to be ringing off the hook. But I don't know, how much of a hurry he is to jump back into anything.
I'm personally biased because Vic is one of my favorite people that I've met around the Bears beat. It's just a great interview, a great guy. I was really hoping to see him succeed in Denver because I know he really wanted that chance. He's not one of those guys where if it didn't work in Denver, and that doesn't surprise me to hear you say that he's not all that anxious to jump back in. He wanted his chance, but I don't think he's one of those guys that's just going to keep pursuing it. Like I said, I'm personally biased because I like him. The other thing was Sean wrote a story yesterday, I believe, about the Seattle Seahawks asking to interview Sean Desai for their open defensive coordinator job. And I mentioned it a little bit before. The one fun thing about Vic Fangio, if that he ended up as the Chicago Bears head coach, which I don't expect to happen, would be the fact that I think that probably means Sean Desai would stay. And I think the Bears should be looking for ways to try and keep Sean Desai in the building.
I don't know. I think he's probably under contract. I think the Seahawks needed permission to talk to him.
That's a good point.
Yeah. I was listening to NFL radio yesterday with Jim Miller and Pat Kerwin. That's one of my favorite things to listen to. And Kerwin talked about a situation where he was, I think, the personnel director with one club, and another team got permission to interview him for the GM job. And the team he was working for said, go interview, but you got to come back when you're done. And after the interview, he came back and they said, well, now we got to wait and see what happens before we agree to let you go. So I don't know this for a fact, but I'm thinking that's probably the terms under which, Sean was able to interview out there, because, it could very well be that the Bears' next hire would want to keep him as the defensive coordinator. And I thought, go to shawlocal.com because Sean's piece is excellent. And I think it makes the case that he's a young up and coming coach, for all the things that went wrong with the Bears last year. That's kind of a hidden story. He did a pretty good job, Sean.
Yeah, and he will probably, I would suspect he'll get more interviews once some of these vacant head coaching positions are filled, because he's like you said, he's an up and coming guy. He's got connections across the league. He's got the Fangio connection. He's got a connection with Matt Rule. They coached together at Temple way back when, and certainly he's a name that people know. And I would expect that he'll get more interviews once some of these head coaches are hired. And that doesn't necessarily mean he'll leave. I think the Bears should do what they can to try to keep him, but the dominoes have to fall right for that situation to work out.
I think Sean Desai, what he did this year with this defense, with Khalil Mack being out for a good portion of the year and playing injured for a large portion of it, the progress of getting Eddie Jackson back on course, really overall, there's not many places on that defense you look at and say I was disappointed with the performance. And also, listen, I'm very lukewarm on Pete Carroll as a head coach at this point of his career. But I will never question Pete Carroll's defensive chops. And the fact that when Pete Carroll's coming asking to interview you for a defensive coordinator job, that's probably a good sign that you know what you're doing.
Yeah, that's definitely a good sign. And the game that sticks out to me too is, I know this was a loss, but that Vikings game in December at home when they had the whole secondary out with COVID and those guys stepped in and played really well. And of course that's the area that Desai came up in as a defensive backs coach, and that's sort of his focus.
Yeah, we cannot overstate that. He was without all four starters in the secondary and held Kirk Cousins to 87 yards passing. And I think they might have been negative yardage at halftime. I think they were. And say what you want about Kirk Cousins when it comes to piling up passing numbers and touchdowns. I mean, he's one of the league leaders. So that was a pretty remarkable performance.
All right, here we had a question from JJ here. How come no interest in Dave Toub? I don't believe this is JJ McCarthy that we were referring to earlier, but could be.
Probably not. JJ, it's one of the great mysteries of the world. I just don't understand it. You look at the success that the rare special teams coach who gets a job has. You look at John Harbaugh, in Baltimore, maybe the best example currently. Dick Vermeil was a special teams coach. Mike Ditka was a special teams coach. Rich Bisaccia, who is going to get some Coach of the Year awards as an interim coach, just the job he took over an impossible situation in Las Vegas. This is why I have no faith in Raiders ownership. He should have the job already. I mean, yeah, you can interview a few other people. To what end? Well, you can make a bigger marketing splash. I mean, Bisaccia earned the job. At least give him a 2-year deal. Let's see what he can do. Special teams coordinators don't get the credit that they deserve. And Dave Toub is the best special teams coordinator in football. The only thing I can tell you is that Dave has had a couple interviews in the past. He can be when he and I got friendly when he was here in Chicago, is because we were both committed to a great charity organization, Midtown Education Foundation, Midtown and Metro, do work for at-risk youth and minority areas to keep them off the streets and keep them in school. And Dave and his wife were committed, and I got committed a number of years ago. Actually, it was Virginia McCaskey, who's on the board of directors, who introduced me to the group back in the mid-'90s. But Dave and I got to spend some time together away from Hallis Hall and doing some stuff. And he's a really good guy, but he can be prickly. The guys who've played for him will tell you, he's got a real rough edge about him. And so my assumption is that he hasn't wowed folks in the interview room when he's gone in for head coaching interviews. But I just don't know how you could do any better when I look at this list of candidates and why he's not getting interviews. Kyle, it doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know.
Yeah, it's not a name that we've heard a lot in this hiring cycle. He was kind of a hot name, probably about 5 years ago?
2-3 years ago. He was
getting
interviews. Yeah, I mean, and it dried up after those interviews didn't work out.
Yeah, absolutely. We got a question from Russell Webster about another name we haven't heard here. Hub, see if you have any thoughts.
Russ, this is a great question. Greg Roman with the 49ers, Dan Hampton, who does our Pro Football Weekly TV show with me. You know who Dan Hampton is, obviously, NFL Hall of Famer with the Bears. He's been asking me the last couple of weeks, why is nobody talking about Greg Roman? I thought it was maybe because, like Vic, he was kind of older and a career coordinator. Greg Roman's only 49 years old, and he has had incredible success, particularly with today's model, the athletic mobile quarterback. I mean, he's the guy who made Colin Kaepernick a household name. He's the guy who made Lamar Jackson an MVP. Look at what he's done with Tyler Huntley, out of nowhere. When Jackson went down with practically no time, And then when Huntley and Jackson were both out, they put 28 points on the board in that game. So, I'm not sure. I don't understand. A lifer, who's got all kinds of contacts, could probably put together a great staff. And I know he had an interview last year. I forget with who, but Sean, to my knowledge, nobody has even said his name with 8 jobs open.
No, I have not seen his name come up. And you mentioned those names, Colin Kaepernick and obviously Lamar Jackson.
And the offenses that they ran. I mean, I'm not just talking about the quarterback.
Right. Yeah. That's exactly what you would want with Justin Fields sitting there as your quarterback, isn't it? I would certainly think that would be at least worth an interview.
The only thing that makes sense to me is if people perceive him within the industry, around the NFL, they perceive him as someone that might not be a great people person for an entire locker room. That's because on the X's and O's side, he certainly seems to fit the bill.
So I saw an interview with Patrick Ricard, his fullback in Baltimore, who said that Gus is like a disappointed dad. He said he doesn't call you out, he doesn't yell at you. He just says, come on, man, and lets you know how disappointed, and he makes you want to play that much harder for him. So that's at least one player who thinks that he's the perfect guy, but that's one player. You never know how that goes.
How about a question from Scotty here? Let's see if I could. Oh, he's asking about Ken Dorsey. Would be interesting as offensive coordinator. Any thoughts there?
Not really. Scotty, I'm not saying you're wrong. I obviously Ken Dorsey, a career backup quarterback. There's a lot of names that really jump out, and I'm not hearing his name all that much. But
where's Ken Dorsey at?
He is the quarterback's coach in Buffalo. So you wonder about a Dable connection there if he gets a head coaching job too.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's a possibility, but I just there's a lot of good quarterback coaches. There's a lot of good OCs, and listen, these are real questions when you talk about, could Dable be going to the Giants because of Joe Schoen? Could Dable come here and bring Ken Dorsey? I'm not belittling the question. You asked for an opinion. I don't really have one. There's other guys that I'm more familiar with, and this is a case of where we worry. Where should the credit go? I think everybody pretty much agrees that Brian Dable is the reason for the success of Josh Allen. I'm sure Dorsey's been helpful too, but it's Dable knowing how to utilize him and growing him as a young man that seems to be making the difference there.
I had no idea that Ken Dorsey was coaching in the NFL at this point, but Ken Dorsey was a part of some of my favorite college football teams of all time.
Yeah, I mean, and he wasn't a bad backup quarterback. He went a few places and started some games when he was put on the field. And clearly, look at the Buffalo offense, so it's not a bad thought. It's just we're getting a little deep here. I mean, I'm focused on the GM, on the head coach, on the coordinators. Only one thing at a time, or two things at a time. Let's do it that way.
Ken Dorsey was also, just one more note since we're already down the rabbit hole, was also the QB coach in Carolina when Cam Newton and the Panthers were rolling.
Oh, nice. Did not realize that. Scotty seems to know a lot about Ken Dorsey. He's replying here when I asked about where he was at. Buffalo pass game QB coach, helped Newton in his MVP here too. Scotty is on team Ken Dorsey apparently.
And Scotty, you're not necessarily wrong. I want to get a GM and a head coach, and then we'll start digging deeper into the coordinators.
We got Tommy Bahamas here. Any thoughts on Dennis Allen? Saw we're going to interview him.
You're the only one who saw that, Tommy.
I would say I don't think.
Yeah, New Orleans Saints defensive coordinator.
No, that's Rappaport tweeted that this morning.
Okay, that's a new one then.
That's a new one just today.
Another failed head coach, has come back and done a nice job in New Orleans with that defense, but I don't know. I think there's plenty of those guys on the list already. Allen, it didn't end well for him last time. But it's certainly a quality name. You're talking about another guy with a ton of experience. Maybe he needs a second chance.
Well, I mean, here his head coaching stop was with the Raiders, so we talk about the dysfunction of trying to run that organization. I guess something to keep in mind. You don't want to disqualify him.
Yeah. Excellent point, Kyle. You're right. Again, I wouldn't disqualify him. I just if the list gets longer now, I want some of the young guns who aren't on the list. I don't need more, former head coaches or anything like that.
Yeah, I agree with you, Hub. I think we're pretty much through the questions, and we are starting to get here near our hour cap. Should we go ahead and wrap it up, gentlemen?
I think it's probably that time. We do want to remind everybody again that if you can get to shawlocal.com, we hope you enjoyed this hour of conversation. You can get it 24/7. We're trying to cover the NFL and certainly the Bears in the NFC North as well as anybody. And if you're listening as a podcast, we were able to get these questions. A lot of folks are joining us live, and we do that every Friday morning at 9:30. All you got to do is go to Sean's Twitter account at Sean_Hammond. Kyle is at Kyle Nabors. Mine is at Hub_Arkush, and that will bring you right into the podcast between 9:30 and 10:30 Chicago time on Friday mornings. If not, make sure you at least get your subscription so it's downloaded for you automatically by going to iTunes or your app store on your phone or shawlocal.com. And guys, I'd like to wrap with some predictions, but I got nothing to base them on. I wish I could be a fly on the wall in this room. I'm very comfortable with the fact that Bill Polian is guy. Here's something to get a thought on from you guys, and then we'll wrap it up. Greg Gabriel, who I talked about earlier, and I were talking about this last night. Can we at least take comfort in the idea that Bill Polian is going to make these hires and not George McCaskey? I mean, is he there just to guide the process and ask George to make a choice? Or is he there at the end of the day to say, George, these are my top 3 picks, much like each of us did at shawlocal.com? I certainly hope that it's the latter, because in the end of the day, I don't just want Bill Polian guiding these guys. I want him to say to George, if it was my team, this is who I would hire. And if that happens, I'm comfortable with it, because you got a Hall of Fame executive, one of the best ever to do it, making these decisions. If this is just him helping to orchestrate these interviews and then George is going to make his best guess, then I'm not overly comfortable with what's going to happen here.
Yeah, I think we're all in the same boat on that. Definitely at this point we've seen enough of George running the show. I'd feel much better essentially if Bill handed him a list and said, these are my rankings, go off those.
And I would think at this point, having been through this a few times, George would ask that question, who would you hire? If Bill doesn't come out and give him his opinion, I would think George would be seeking that.
Well, I do know that Ernie, of course, he was a big Ryan Pace fan, but did not make the decision. And I know that he was adamant about John Fox being a good idea, but didn't make that decision either. And so hopefully this time they'll take the next step and let the guy that they hired and are paying a lot of money to help him make the decision, or at least, give a final recommendation and put great weight on it. So
really quickly here, Rick Gonzalez asked if we'll go live when they hire a GM or coach. That it depends on when it happens. Like if it's
what time of day,
the plan is yes. We'll get someone up on the website as quickly as possible for breaking news. And then, we'll be texting each other and say, hey, can you guys jump on? It might not be immediately, but I would expect within a couple hours at the latest, we'll be on here streaming, talking about it. And just here to wrap it up, Hub, Mike Johnson had asked us for our thoughts on the playoff games this weekend. I think that's a good way to leave it.
It is, and I think there's 4 great games. I've done some extensive work on them for the Pro Football Weekly TV show. Let me ask you guys, just go ahead first and give your quick thoughts. Sean, you want to start?
Yeah, I'm excited to see, what the Packers have here. It sounds like Randall Cobb's coming back, correct?
He has been activated, yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'm really, the other thing too, we talk about all these guys who are supposed to be potentially season-ending injuries. What are the Titans going to look like with Derrick Henry potentially being back? I think that's a really interesting storyline, an interesting scenario. I like the Bengals in that game, but I'm really curious to see what's going on there with Derrick Henry.
Kyle?
Oh man, I think it's gonna be a lot of fun this weekend. I picked San Francisco to win the NFC at the beginning of the year. Then the injuries started to pile up. They've gotten healthy. They're a lot of fun. I think this is a really, really intriguing matchup against Green Bay. I think it's gonna be a fun game. And this Buffalo-Kansas City matchup is I can't wait to see it. Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes playing to go to the AFC Championship game. It doesn't really get any better than that.
Guys, yeah, I'm a lot more curious about the NFC games than the AFC games. I think all 4 have the potential to be great games, and I don't think it would be stunning if the Bengals or Bills pulled an upset. But I'm pretty comfortable that we're going to see a Titans-Chiefs AFC title game.
Really? See, I'm pretty confident Buffalo's winning this weekend.
Well, and I understand that, but just starting with the Titans and to Sean's point, they're the number one seed. They've beaten all these teams, okay, and they did it without Derrick Henry for more than half the season, without A.J. Brown and Julio Jones for big chunks of the season, and everybody waiting for next week to be the week they came apart. And yeah, they had a clinker against Houston at home, but I mean, they're the number one seed, and now they're getting Derrick Henry. Now, it's a game time decision tomorrow morning. We don't know for sure, or Saturday morning, but we assume they'll have Derrick Henry. We do know they have Julio Jones and A.J. Brown healthy for the first time. And the Titans to me are the better team. Again, I wouldn't be surprised if the Bengals upset them, but it's not that hard for me. And then I look at Kansas City and Buffalo. Everything about Buffalo is true, but guys, everything about Kansas City is true. They're trying to go to their third straight Super Bowl, and they've now got most of their weapons back healthy. And suddenly, Jerick McKinnon don't discount what this kid has done for them. The missing piece in the offense, that multifaceted Swiss Army knife running back, and the way the Chiefs' defense has played. They've played better than the Buffalo defense over the last 8-10. I'm not sure how, but that's what they're doing. So those games, I'm not so sure. The NFC games, I mean, if Tristan Wirfs can't go, Tom Brady's in trouble. Basically, they got sacked 22 times all season, 3 of them in the Rams game. And then in one game last week, 4 times, including the first play after Wirfs went down when Jeff Wells came on the field. And now Wells is hurt too. And so the Rams, you look for the hot team, and the way they destroyed the car. I don't like the coast-to-coast trip, but to me, the underdog, I'm not sure the Rams shouldn't be favored in this one. And then I get to the 49ers and Packers, and I'm with you, Kyle. I mean, the 49ers have been playing better football than anybody in the NFC the last 6-7 weeks. But I'm not going against Aaron Rodgers at home. Now that said, I'm sure you guys have heard the stat. This is the 5th time under Aaron Rodgers that the Packers have been the number one seed. And the first 4 times they did not get to the Super Bowl. So take that as you will. You also know what their playoff record is against the 49ers. The 49ers are the more physical team. The big key here, we know that Trey Hendrickson has cleared the concussion protocol for the Bengals. We're hearing that Bosa is likely to go, but we don't know that yet. If Bosa doesn't go, then I don't give the 49ers much of a chance. But here's an interesting one for you guys. They played week 3. You know what happened. The 49ers went up with 37 seconds left, 27-21. And in 37 seconds, Rodgers took the Packers 42 yards on 5 plays for a 51-yard game-winning field goal from Mason Crosby as the clock ran out. But what didn't happen in that game? Deebo Samuel had never lined up at running back yet, and Elijah Mitchell was out. Okay? That's what's changed this 49er team. So to me, that's the game. That one Saturday night, I don't know. I'm not picking against Rodgers and the Packers because it's suicide to do that at Lambeau, especially as they're getting healthy. But that's what makes this weekend so compelling. So
I do want to take 1 second. I got a personal victory lap to do here, guys. I get more wrong than I get right, so I'm going to go ahead and take my victory lap while I'm thinking of it. At some point during the offseason when we were doing this show, I definitely did say that I thought the Cincinnati Bengals could be a playoff team. So I'm taking a small victory lap, okay?
All right. Well, hey, not only were you absolutely right, but I'll jump in. I had the Tennessee Titans winning the AFC as my preseason Super Bowl pick in our opening Pro Football Weekly TV show. Unfortunately, I had them playing the Seahawks in the Super Bowl, so I only get half a lap. It doesn't always work out that way. Guys, we are over there's no limit. We can go as long as we want, but we don't want to get to the point where we're boring people. We thank everybody so much for being with us again this week. Stay with the Twitter accounts, guys. We will absolutely have a special edition of the podcast once these hires are made. And if you go to @Kyle Nabors, @Sean_Hammond, @Hub Arkush, just keep an eye on it. If you hear there's been a hire, we'll let you know how soon we're getting on the air. We will be anxious to have you join us so we can all talk about it. And if it doesn't happen until next Friday, number 1, be worried. Number 2, we will be back next Friday at 9:30 Chicago time. Have a great weekend, everybody. Enjoy the divisional playoffs.